Hi, I'm Eric the Security Guy. George Santayana famously wrote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." His words ring particularly true regarding cybersecurity issues such as passwords. Authentication systems that rely solely on a username and password provide an unacceptable level of security for anything connected to a public network, including the internet. History has proven that passwords are too easy to steal, intercept, and guess. Predictable human factors result in password reuse across multiple systems, magnifying the impact of breaches. For example, in December 2017, security researchers at 4iQ discovered a 41 gigabyte file containing a shocking 1.4 billion username and password combinations, apparently aggregated from multiple breaches. These credentials have undoubtedly been used to compromise countless accounts. Adding a second authentication factor, in other words, basic multi-factor authentication, or MFA for short, is definitely an improvement. And over the past few years, many businesses, including Amazon, Facebook, Google, and Microsoft, have adopted open standards such as FIDO2, FIDO-U2F, time-based one-time passwords, the standard used by Google Authenticator and Authy, and others. Google and Microsoft deserve credit for helping to push the FIDO2 and FIDO-UTF standards forward and implementing them in their products. Curiously, the government, finance, and insurance verticals, once seen as leaders in the cybersecurity space, are late to this dance. Some have deployed cognitive or SMS-based MFA, both of which are weak. They're better than nothing, but certainly not state-of-the-art. Despite the widespread availability of low-cost multi-factor authentication solutions, too many internet-accessible systems continue to use simple username and password schemes, and many users fail to take advantage of multi-factor authentication even when it's offered for free. In 2018, according to Google engineers, less than 10% of active Gmail users have enabled two-factor authentication, even though obtaining access to a person's email often allows the intruder to identify and take over most of the user's online accounts. To be fair, Google leads the pack. Unlike many internet email providers, they use heuristics to identify and block suspicious behavior. But the low multi-factor authentication enrollment rate highlights a major factor contributing to weak authentication. Most internet users do not understand the risks and seriously underestimate the consequences of a compromise. The fundamental problem we face is that simple password systems are cheap to implement. As long as people accept them as good enough, there's little incentive for developers to adopt more robust authentication systems. Getting authentication right is much trickier than most people think. There are several commercial and open source solutions to choose from, and the vast majority of developers would be much better off using one of them instead of building their own from scratch. One example is Keycloak, an open source identity and access management solution aimed at modern applications and services. It supports OpenID, SAML, OAuth 2, and provides Google Authenticator compatibility right out of the box, and it's free. For those who prefer a commercially managed cloud solution, Okta provides state-of-the-art authentication solutions. MFA is certainly a step forward, but authentication systems of the future must become more intelligent and adopt adaptive, risk-based techniques. Rather than just a binary password correct or not approach, we need to consider the security requirements to the application, and in many cases, the specific transaction, and use multiple signals to make intelligent, reliable, and user-friendly authentication decisions. As part of this approach, authentication systems need to consider not only the individual user, but also the application and the current threat environment. Most systems today focus on individual users and use primitive counting logic to detect brute force attacks. For example, after a certain number of failed login attempts, the system might lock the user out. However, This approach does little to counter other kinds of attacks, such as password stuffing, in which an attacker uses a list of stolen credentials and only has to try each account once to find out if the credentials work or not. Conflicts often arise between strong authentication and user experience. Applications that require users to enter a 6-digit number from their phone several times a day might be secure, but they're a real pain. A more intelligent, risk-based solution would recognize the user has already authenticated from the same computer in the same location a short time ago, and in that case, even a short numeric PIN might be sufficient. On the other hand, if the same user attempts to authenticate from a different computer in a different country, the system should recognize the elevated risk and invoke advanced multi-factor authentication or even block the login altogether. Other information, including IP reputation, intelligence feeds, lists of known compromised credentials, and other factors should be incorporated into the authentication system. For example, if a user logs in with a username and password exposed in a data breach, it could trigger additional authentication processes that include a password reset. We also need to move beyond the concept of authentication as just an application's front door. In some cases, authentication should be more dynamic. For example, in a financial system, additional authentication mechanisms could be triggered based on transaction types, amounts, or other behavioral factors. In addition to providing a higher level of security, this approach could also improve the user experience. A lot of people ask which multi-factor authentication is best, and it really depends on the application. However, as a general rule, hardware devices such as YubiKeys provide the strongest authentication, followed by products that implement the TOTP standard such as Google Authenticator, Authy, and push-based systems such as Microsoft Authenticator, Okta Verify, and Duo Mobile. I do not recommend implementing cognitive-based authentication options, the ones that ask questions like your mother's maiden name or the street you grew up on, because it's too easy for people to reveal that information accidentally. Have you seen quizzes on Facebook recently? I also recommend against SMS and telephone-based authentication because the telephone system was not designed for this purpose. The mechanisms are too easy to defeat. Santillana was clearly ahead of his time. It's 2021. We need to learn from the past and implement much smarter authentication solutions. Thank you for watching. Please help me out by liking this video and subscribing to my channel. As always, if you have any questions or would like to suggest a topic for a future video, please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next video.